There it is. We are live. Hello, everybody. How's it going? How are you doing? I'm Greg Nibbler. This is Digital Trends. This is our weekly Roundtable Tech podcast called Trends with Benefits. And of course, we are an audio podcast where you can download those, but also we are a video show. And so we're broadcasting live on Facebook and Twitter and Twitch and a bunch of other places. So thanks for being here. And that means that you can join the conversations we get to have. Each week, it's a different topic that we cover. But this week, it's in particular a pretty important one that we want to tackle and talk about things from the technological standpoint. Now, obviously, there is a lot going on in the United States right now. We have the pandemic, but also a lot happening in association with the protests and everything else that's happening. And that's why we wanted to cover today the idea of algorithmic discrimination. And so basically, that's talking about how technology itself is already pre-programmed to possibly be biased or different ways that technology is being utilized. So we're just going to discuss that. We're going to have an open conversation about it, give you some information. We want to hear what you want to say about it as well. So all that's going to be part of the show today. So thanks for being here with us. But let's introduce our roundtable cast of characters here to start the show off. I'm Greg Nibbler, and to my virtual right, it is
Adrian Warner, aka Hot Nozzle.
Hot Nozzle.
Hot Nozzle.
No, it's close. It was close.
I was going to count you guys in. I should.
Yeah, I know. That's right. You were supposed to count us in on that. Well, we'll get it figured out. All right. And so we got Adrian Warner going to her virtual right. It is.
Hey, I'm Caleb Dennison, aka The Whiskey Mist, aka Chicken Bone, aka Badfinger.
How is your finger, Caleb? I mean, for everybody who watches this show, they probably are aware of your finger at this point. It's still there. It's still taped up. It's how many more weeks do you have with that thing?
I don't know. I mean, it's been 3 weeks as of tomorrow evening, and it is just a slow going deal, and it hurts less than it did before, but it's still uncomfortable. I'll keep you posted. I think, this will be a good check-in to see how is Caleb's finger holding up.
We can guarantee that
the day. I eagerly await the day that we get to call you Good Finger.
Caleb, Badfinger Dennison. Badfinger's got a good ring to it, though. I do kind of like that one. All right. Well, going from Badfinger, we've got on the other end, it is.
Yeah, I am Drew Prindle, aka Professor Prindle. I normally do the history segments here. But since today I'm not really doing so much of a history segment, I mean, there's a little bit of in there. But before we get into that, I kind of just want to preface this and underscore again why we're talking about this. So, like, as you guys know, there's, with these ongoing Black Lives Matter protests, they're not just about police brutality. They're also about systemic racism, particularly like structural and institutional racism, which are the types that have persisted for decades because they're quite literally built into our institutions. So you're probably aware of the presence of those things in like law enforcement and the justice system and higher education and stuff like that. But what you might not be aware of is that these forms of bias and discrimination have also made their way into a lot of the technologies we use, including things like facial recognition, search engines, artificial intelligence. And that's what we're going to talk about today, because in order to get rid of these things, we have to address them.
Yeah, that is a great way to preface that, to talk about this, because we're going to hit on all of those different things, just the way that's being used. But starting off, let's go with you, Drew, because you did some research on, in particular, like predictive software. Can you explain what this is?
Yeah. So one of the things that I wanted to kind of start this discussion off with was predictive policing algorithms, because they're one of these things that brings together like racism, law enforcement, and technology all into like the same umbrella. So predictive policing is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. It's trying to predict when and where crime will happen so that you can stop it. It's pretty much what was going on in Minority Report, but instead it's instead of those weird, like, mystics that are floating in a pool or whatever, we just use algorithms. So it's not as like weird and sci-fi. It's kind of just boring, honestly. It's like math and numbers.
I completely forgot that it was weird mystics in pools for Minority Report. That I totally forgot about that part of it.
Yeah. That and like Tom Cruise running through streets. Anyway, so yeah, like I said, these are made by algorithms instead of mystics, and police forces all over the country and all over the world actually use predictive policing systems. Interestingly, though, they have been around for quite some time. They have a really, really interesting backstory, which I just want to say I read a lot of this in a book called The Thin Blue Lie, which is all about like the failure of high-tech policing. It's by this guy, Matt Stroud. I highly recommend checking it out if you're at all interested in just like policing and technology and racism and all of that stuff. It's a great book for that. So the first predictive policing methods kind of started in the late 70s, early 80s in New York City, which at the time was going through like one of the worst crime waves in the city's history. There was actually a New York Times headline in 1980 that said, 1980 worst year of crime in city history. So things were bad. It was like front page news on the New York Times. So there was a lot of pressure on law enforcement to do more, and they were facing budget cuts. So it was kind of like the air of the time was like, do more with less. So the time was ripe for like new methods to pop up. Now, during that time, there was a New York Police Department transit detective. His name was Jack Maple. And he came up with the idea for predictive policing one night while he was at a restaurant. So the way the story goes is that he noticed the restaurant manager going over the receipts for the night with the owner and realized that, like, based on the numbers alone, like how much they were bringing in and how much people were paying and tipping, the restaurant could tell how they were doing and whether or not they were making everybody happy. And that kind of sets off this light bulb for the guy. And he realizes, I mean, that the New York Police Department keeps records every time we do an arrest or whatever, but they didn't actually use those records to divine anything. It was always just to like look back and use them for court cases. So he started tracking crime data on the subway, which is his job, and using that to determine kind of where hotspots were and where crime might happen. Unsurprisingly, that method turned out to be extremely effective, so much so that there was a point where his superiors apparently got annoyed at him because he made so many arrests that there was too much paperwork to process. And also he had to be in court so often to appear to testify that they had to pay him overtime for all of that time. So it was insanely effective. He starts making tons of arrests. Just to blast through this, after a while, the NYPD gives him more resources to expand on this apparently super effective technique. And he ends up developing this system called Charts of the Future, which is basically just like the world's first formal predictive policing methodology. So then after a while, he catches the eye of this new NYPD chief, a guy named Bill Bratton, who ends up giving him even more resources and eventually, devises an even more sophisticated system that they call CompStat. And he takes that and applies it to the entire New York Police Department. So it's not just like the subway division. They're tracking crime across the entire city, sharing it with every cop. It goes to all their computers. The reports are distributed everywhere. And then in the 1980s and 90s, like crime rates start to drop. And when that happens, sorry, there's a fly in my face. When that happens,
we are live in case anybody ever wonders about that.
But when that happens, basically a ton of the credit for these dropping crime rates goes to Bill Bratton and Jack Maple and that program that they developed. So that program starts getting a ton of like notoriety and notice from other police departments. And basically through the 90s and the 2000s, those methods start to get adopted by other police departments. And at the same time, computers are advancing, and just like the methods for predictive policing in general get better and better and more sophisticated. But it wasn't until around 2010 that anybody kind of started to take a critical eye at these systems and be like, well, how do they really work? And as soon as they did, which kind of really started happening, 2010, 2012, and much later, they got much more damning. The studies were much deeper, but they pretty much discovered this fundamental flaw, which was that the predictions that those systems were making were based on decades of data that was gathered from just like racist and discriminatory policing practices. And it's really easy looking back on it now. You realize, well, duh, if you're sending cops to specific neighborhoods that, racist cops were patrolling too much just because they were assholes, and it's using that data to tell you where to go again. And then you go there and you make more arrests because that's where the computer system told you to go. It's kind of ends up being this like self-fulfilling prophecy where they're making more arrests and, discriminating against people of color just because historically those neighborhoods were discriminated against. And since then, there have been tons of studies that have come out that have basically confirmed that. But here's the issue is, even though we know this now, it's really, really difficult to go back in and retroactively change those systems because the algorithms, now that they're using like machine learning and all this AI stuff, they're learning on their own and kind of self-adjusting based on the data sets that we feed them. So you can't go in and just remove the data, the crappy old racist reports from, the 80s or whatever. That's not going to fix the problem. So for that reason, a lot of companies are just outright saying, we're not doing predictive policing anymore. Like, we're done with it. In fact, IBM used to be one of the biggest suppliers of predictive policing software, and which I believe just today they said they're not doing that anymore. They're getting rid of predictive policing and facial recognition. They're just stopping that entirely. And it's
Yeah.
just because they realize that human biases have made their way into algorithms.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about that IBM thing too here in just a little bit, because that is an important step. But I didn't realize how prevalent, I mean, honestly, I just didn't know how prevalent that predictive software was in policing in general.
Yeah, it's huge because it was, the guy who kind of championed it, Bill Bratton, was a good businessman. And after he kind of rose to fame at the NYPD, he quit and then kind of took it on the road and helped sell it and market it to other police precincts around the world. And it really just took off. Like, there was a lot of belief in this system as a crime fighting tool. And like I said, it didn't really come under fire until much later. And by that time, it had already done its self-fulfilling prophecy thing and made stuff
Right.
very, very much worse.
Wow. That's, I mean, and I guess like, I'm assuming there's still places that are still using this software.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Absolutely. I mean, there are a couple big companies that are like the main suppliers of it. One of them is Predpol, because what a creative name, predictive policing. They are probably the major one. And I mean, they have a pretty sophisticated algorithm. They've worked with universities and stuff. So they've kind of addressed some of the issues that I brought up about how, being based on bad data, and they've adjusted algorithms and all this, but there's, those concerns still remain.
Well, I think, that data part of it is something too that I know that we're going to get into. And again, we're broadcasting live. If people have comments they want to drop in, please feel free to do so and let us know. We want to talk about these things as well. But yeah, we're just going through how this all really is embedded in a lot of technology. And you talk about how people are training it, which therefore the biases that people have are things get passed down. And that's one of the other things that people are talking about with artificial intelligence in general and training that. And Caleb, I know you did some reading and research on that. And just, I mean, there's certainly a lot of examples that we've seen just with AI not acting how we would expect it to.
There's been a few, and I think all of us know of different ones, different instances of it. But I think you might remember what happened on Twitter with Microsoft's like AI bot named Tay, which does anybody remember how long it took for Tay to become like a neo-Nazi? It was really
I feel like it was like a record time. It
like
was within
hours,
the same day.
Yeah, it was within the same day. And I mean, it was almost immediately shut down once they realized where it had gone. But I think that's indicative of the larger problem that I'll talk about in a minute, which is as AI is growing, like whatever data it gets fed is what it's going to use. And if it's nasty, and internet data does tend to be nasty input, then you're going to create something nasty. But another example is, I think it's Google Vision. Back in 2015, Google Vision was employed to start like labeling photos, images, and it was unfortunately labeling some Black people as gorillas, which is absolutely terrible. And they didn't fix the problem at the time. They just stopped making gorilla a solve for an image. They just removed gorilla. So even pictures of actual gorillas weren't being labeled as gorillas anymore, which is just a terrible move. Like, they didn't want to take the whole thing down and try to address the problem. They just thought, well, this is an isolated issue and we'll just shut that down, which I frankly think is terrible. But that problem continues to this day, where it is still misidentifying things. There is, and well, let's dig into that whole notion of biased data right now, because again, the internet is not the nicest place, and if AI is getting its information from the internet, it doesn't have the ability to place context around things. So it really struggles. You tell it something and it registers it, and then it starts to apply it. So I think there's broad agreement that AI is not really a political problem; it's an engineering problem. And relatively speaking, we're still in early days with machine learning, and it's people that are programming it, and people bring their own biases, whether intentionally or unintentionally, to the programming of these AIs, these machine learning systems, and those end up, one way or the other, those things end up going down a dark path. There's a really great article that if you're interested in learning more about how this happens, because it is a pretty deep topic. There's a really great article at towarddatascience.com, why your AI might be racist and what to do about it. Fantastic article. And one of the things that it talks about are that there are some just honest problems. Like a self-driving car, for instance, is going to have a harder time detecting a Black person at night than white people. That's just an unfortunate mistake. It's not racist, it's just unfortunate, right? But then you get to situations that are more clearly, they trend towards racism because, again, of systemic racism in all of these systems. And there's this notion that correlation does not equal causation. The AI is just getting numbers, right? And it's yes, no, this thing is associated with this thing, and it starts compiling things with all of this data and doesn't really know what to do with it. And one of the examples that was in this article I just referred to was really great. It says, say you've got an AI that is being trained to accept or reject job applications, and one neighborhood in the city is just a crime-ridden ghetto. All previous applicants from that area were bad. The AI is going to learn that coming from this area means you are a terrible applicant, right? Not necessarily true. And then to take that a step further, if the AI receives a new application from a young woman who won a Nobel Prize, that woman has bad luck in this situation because the AI has no idea what a Nobel Prize is. And so it doesn't know what to do with that information. So again, we're talking about, AI being in its infancy is a big part of the problem. We haven't figured out how to give it the right kind of data, to give it, to restrict bad data, to help it prevent from drawing conclusions where it has no business drawing conclusions. And we also have to admit that we have a lot less data on certain racial minorities, and that data is always skewed one direction. So if you feed it into a machine, it's going to start seeing the world that way, and that's a big part of the problem. It doesn't know any better. The fact is, for as smart as artificial intelligence sounds like it is or could be, it's really very dumb, and it relies 100% on humans in order for it to grow and to learn how to make its better decisions. It's just not advanced enough to put things into context and draw the necessary lines.
Well, and if you have no diversity too in training that AI, like you said, whether implicit or explicit, those biases are going to be put into that data because the person putting it in, either for whatever reason, that's what it's learning from. So like you said, you need a bunch of people, I think, at least that's my opinion, a bunch of different people helping to train the AI.
Well, and also you need to train the AI how to spot fake data. So you actually need to build a machine, a different kind of AI that makes fake data to train the other AI how to spot it and reject it. And I am no computer programmer, but that sounds like really hard.
Yeah, it does. I mean, one example too that I want to point out too that happened today, because MSN, for their news, they actually replaced a whole bunch of human journalists with AI to run its news and a bunch of searches on there. And it actually came up with it was racist in confusing two different singers. Because it was AI that was doing it, because he wasn't a human that was actually analyzing what was going on, where it's really obvious this AI just did this because it's an AI and it has no idea what it's doing. So it's just showing like some of the problems of implementing this stuff. Also, keep human journalists. That's number one.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, let's look just a little bit deeper on that before we move on. They got rid of a bunch of journalists and replaced it with AI because the job seemed simple. Find accurate news reporting from other places and basically regurgitate it for MSN. And what you find out through this mistake is that the human element of the decision making, of the fact checking, of the research, still needs to be performed. The AI can't do it. It's going to screw that stuff up because, again, it's contextual, right? It just doesn't know how to do it. It's very basic, you know, so you need that human interaction, and we're not giving it enough of that.
Going from that, which I mean, and you're 100% right. Like, we're talking about AI, predictive technology, and all those things, which, you know, and how racism and different biases are in that. But it's not just that. There's things that we do every day. And Adrian, I know you did some research on this, talking about like search engines and just like things that we're using more often.
Yeah, I mean, what I really wanted to take from, Caleb's points that he's making is the requirement for auditing by humans, with a human connection is so important. And I'm going to be talking a bit about this associate professor at UCLA and this researcher and writer called, her name is Dr. Sophia Noble. And she had this really great quote around what I'm going to be talking about, where she said, if you're going to design technology for society, you should have a deep education on societal issues. So it goes back to not just reporting, but like Caleb said, engineering and the people who are creating those technologies. And even far back as what Drew said, like somebody came up with that idea. They did not intend it to have these repercussions, but because of the way it's modeled and the information it's fed, it holds up these implicit biases that somebody never thought about in the first place, because that's not what their job was at the time to think about. So Noble wrote this book that I believe came out about 2 years ago, and it's called Algorithms of Oppression. Drew, I think, has read it. I don't know if you other guys have read it, but
I haven't read it, but it's definitely something I want to read.
Yeah, I definitely want to pick this up now, because she's talking about how many of the algorithms that are driving today's tech are contributing to, more and more marginalization of minorities. And she actually used to work in the advertising industry and help clients with SEO, which is kind of how she came about to realizing that, our search engines could also be part of the problem. And she first noticed that, when she was looking up keywords around women and minorities in Google search, the engine would just come back with super sexualized results. And there's actually another person who contributed a little bit to this research, Latanya Sweeney at Harvard University. Another PhD was also noticing a similar pattern, getting things like, have you ever been arrested, targeted ads through Google, which, didn't come up for her white colleagues. Exactly. Yeah. So, you can tell that these algorithms are picking up this super frequent discriminatory behavior because the internet has this information out there and available. And then, those cultural associations that are made based on that behavior. And, like we said, the internet's not really a great place all the time. And it's just, it's an automated, like an algorithm is an automated decision tree. Like if it's made by somebody who has, a male, like Western centric point of view, it's going to also pick up on that information. So, and something else that she pointed out too that was really interesting is that marginalized groups are less likely to have resources to put keywords together and optimize their own content for their own interests. So, the algorithms are just going to keep continually picking up on this information that might be correct, but is still kind of in that, like that white male-centric point of view. And something else too that was interesting, this came actually a little bit before revealing that Google's search results could be contributing to the problem, is that Amazon was also having a problem. This was published back in 2016, this finding, so it's been updated and changed, but a Bloomberg report revealed that Amazon same-day deliveries that were being offered to Prime users were unintentionally excluding Black neighborhoods, because the rollout where this was occurring and the zip codes where this was occurring for the same day activity was taking place in these major cities, and then the communities that were not able to support that rollout were getting left out, and it essentially was being kind of fed by the city's already like fixed problems, or not fixed, sorry, but like the past issues of redlining, but that was getting picked up by the algorithm, and then those communities are getting left out of the delivery service. So it just goes to show you that we keep finding things and we keep changing things. These companies keep making tweaks, but there's always going to be some more underneath.
Yeah. Wow. I had no idea about some of that stuff. I really want to read that book now. Maybe we can get an interview with her too.
Yeah, and she had something recent that I wanted to bring up before we, kind of start wrapping this up, is that she actually posted on Twitter recently about Blackout Tuesday, which happened last week, and she said that the Instagram algorithm was actually starting, because there was a bunch of posts. If you participated, you might have noticed that people are saying not to use the hashtag Black Lives Matter because it was blacking out taking out all of the important information that activists were trying to communicate with that hashtag. Well, she said that the Instagram algorithm actually started to merge the hashtag Blackout Tuesday with the hashtag Black Lives Matter, so that the message was getting drowned out no matter what you did.
So the algorithm was was doing it on its own, just taking it out.
Yeah,
wow.
Exactly.
This reminds me of, you guys may remember when we went over the history of YouTube. One of the things that we talked about was the creation of the YouTube recommended next video algorithm, basically, and how it just kind of started feeding you more and more of the same thing. So if you watched any kind of extremist content or whatever like that, it was going to continue to feed you that more of that same stuff. And it was actually, it's actually been criticized as being one of the reasons that we've seen a lot of radicalization out there, and the spread of racist groups and their recruiting. And that's another instance in which an algorithm is unnaturally bolstering and basically fostering some really bad stuff, to put it mildly. It's just it's in a different way. It's not directly tied to it doesn't seem so directly tied to oppression, but if you think of this algorithm as perpetuating either misinformation or racist information or racist groups, and it's actually helping that spread, that's another instance in which the algorithm is failing us. And their motivation, you have to understand, was just to get people to watch more videos on YouTube. That was the one and only thing it was created for. And we have this unintended but very substantial side effect as a result.
Yeah, like if somebody's searching a keyword that is connected to, something that propagates misinformation or hate speech, and the algorithm doesn't know to disconnect those two. You got to update the algorithm to have that left out. And part of Sophia Noble's findings was that when talking about those key search terms in regards to Black women, well, now it's been adjusted, and when you search Black girls on the internet, it first points to Black girls code instead of these super sexualized images.
Well, at least that's one fix, but it sounds like there's so many things that need to be fixed. And going back to what Drew brought up at the beginning with IBM, with their facial recognition software, that's a big thing that they are just dropping out of it altogether because of there's too many implicit problems. It's being used in too many different ways for the wrong reasons, and they're just backing out. And they were one of the leading companies with this kind of stuff, and they're like, nope, it's not ready yet until we figure this out, because there's too many issues with it and too many things that are happening using that technology. I think it's going to be interesting to see how some of these companies address this, but I think awareness is a huge thing right now, and that's why with this podcast we're just touching on the very tip of the iceberg of a whole lot of issues, but just focusing on this one side of technology to bring that to light. And I don't know, I've just learned a lot just from what you three just brought up here on the show today. And I want to say thank you to everybody who's tuning in to Trends with Benefits, because we have this show every week, and each week it's a different topic. It depends what it is, but it may be something that's the sign of the times, addresses that, maybe something different, but we've got a lot of back episodes for everybody to check out as well. I didn't want to cut anybody off. If anybody had anything final to say before we go, everybody. Okay. Just want to make sure. So for everything that we talked about too, we've got more at digitaltrends.com. You can follow up with all of that, and feel free to send us an email too. It's podcast@digitaltrends.com. Let us know what you think. If you have ideas, thoughts, comments you want to share, questions, feel free to send those in, and hit subscribe wherever you get podcasts, and we'll be back next week with another episode.